Comic Book Savant, Real to Real, Movie Talk. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant podcast. I'm your host, James Harris. This episode is going to be a Real to Real Movie Talk episode where I'm going to be doing a review of Wonder Woman 1984. If you haven't had a chance to watch the movie at this point, you definitely want to cut the podcast off at this moment and wait till you get a chance to see the movie, because I will be going into full detail and discussing some spoilers and story aspects. So if you haven't seen it and you don't want the movie spoiled for you, definitely click off the podcast and wait till after you had a chance to see the movie to listen to the podcast. But with that being said, let's get into the particulars. Wonder Woman 1984 is a Warner Brothers DC film. It is directed by Patty Jenkins and also written by Patty Jenkins, Jeff Johns, and Dave Callum. The breakdown for the movie is as follows. Diana must contend with a work colleague and a businessman whose desire for extreme wealth sends the world on a path of destruction after an ancient artifact that grants wishes goes missing. And the cast is as follows. We have Gal Gadot reprising her role as Diana Prince in Wonder Woman. We have Chris Pine back in the movie as Steve Trevor. Kristen Wiig as Barbara Minerva, aka I'm totally blanking. Barbara Minerva. Cheetah. I totally blanked on that. Pedro Pascal as Maxwell Lord. Robin Wright back as Antiope, and Connie Nielsen as Hippolyta. Now, going into this movie, I feel like it was a very polarizing movie. I know going in, I've learned over the years of doing a podcast and doing reviews, and I try to always take my personal feelings and opinions out of a movie when I want to review it. Because if it's anything really comic related that's not skewing towards the horror side of things, because I'm not a huge fan of horror, I always try to keep an open mind. I tell this story from time to time about, I think the last time I had high expectations for a movie was like maybe Blade 2 or maybe like Spider-Man 3. And those reviews I did on those movies went down in infamy. I think I did at that point like a 3.5 hour review of Spider-Man 3 at one point. So I just learned to kind of go in as open-minded as possible, but it was always something about during the advertising campaign for Wonder Woman 1984, I just didn't like any of the trailers. Just didn't resonate with me personally. So it was so weird, and it could have been just like the time frame that's going on around us. We're still, battling this pandemic. So it's been a crazy year. So when they announced, this movie was going to come out on HBO Max, I have HBO Max. For those of you that don't know, like outside of my love of comics, I'm an extreme tech head. My educational background is in, computers, web design, IT. So I always, got all the streaming services, all the bibs and bobs and things like that. So, I have HBO Max. So I got excited literally when they dropped the commercial online that, hey, we're going to be releasing Wonder Woman 1984 Christmas Day. I was like, yo, this is going to be so cool. I get a chance to see the movie. And I got really excited or giddy. And it was weird because before that point, I had no interest in seeing the movie. I knew I was going to see it because I watch all these movies. I do reviews on them, but I just wasn't stoked as I have been. And I really enjoyed the first Wonder Woman movie, and I like Gal in that role. But everything I saw just was like, I'm not feeling the direction this movie is going. It seems so far left from the original film. Not saying I wanted a rehash of the first movie, but inadvertently, I think we have a rehash of the first movie when I'm going to talk about that later. But let me just get into some of the finer points. So it was cool. Sat down Christmas Day with the family, watched Wonder Woman, and the opening sequence I really enjoyed because for the most part, I think Patty Jenkins have a great handle on the Amazons and Themyscira. I love those scenes. Like going back, and I had just watched because I knew it was coming out. I think the night before Wonder Woman 1984 came out, I rewatched Wonder Woman, which I hadn't watched in a good little bit, and it's still just a great movie. Still don't care for the last part of the movie, the last act of the movie, but 3 of the 4 acts were extremely good, and it kind of tapered off at the end and didn't quite stick the landing. But I forgot how much I enjoyed the movie, and I was like on a high note going into watching the second movie, and I love those parts. So going back and seeing the opening of the movie, um, um, really got me stoked. And I know at one point she talked about in between Wonder Woman 1984 and the third Wonder Woman movie, she wanted to do an Amazon's film, and she had talked about it in interviews quite a bit. I don't know if that's going to happen or not based on the reaction to this film. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I feel like that part she has nailed to a science, and you could tell, and it was a big disparity between the Themyscira we saw in Wonder Woman to the Themyscira we saw in the Justice League movie. But we know tons of problems wrong with the Wonder Woman movie. Excuse me, not the Wonder Woman, the Justice League movie, which I'm really stoked about the Snyder cut, but I digress. But when it shifted from that flashback sequence in the very opening scene, and really thinking about the movie as a whole, once I finished watching the movie, and I watched the movie again before I decided to do this review, because with certain movies that I feel, a lot of times when I watch movies, because I've been reviewing movies for so long at this point, between this and my other movie podcast that I used to do, Pop Media Savant, at this point, I've literally reviewed thousands of movies at this point, probably. Um, I tend to know a lot of times, once I see a movie the first time, I can nail all the parts that I, feel about the movie, and I could grade it to give it a fair review. Certain movies, what was it? Rise of the Skywalker, I think, was one. No, The Last Jedi was one. And I literally went to the movies twice, back-to-back days, to watch that movie. And still, to this day, I still don't 100% know how I feel or how I would grade that movie. I graded it the best I could, but it always leaves me like kind of middle of the road. It's a similar feeling with this movie. I rewatched the whole thing again. And one thing that I came out of watching it 2 times is that I don't think the opening sequence needed to be in the movie at all. But for me, it was one of the high notes of the movie. But far as a plot device or the importance to the story, it could have totally did without it. It didn't really have any bearing on the overall story outside of the lesson that they were trying to have Diana learn throughout the movie, which we learned at multiple points. So it kind of was overdone, but I love the sequence. It was shot beautifully. It looked amazing. Excuse me. But honestly, it didn't need to be in a movie. Just realistically, it didn't. The next scene that was in the modern day, that was the mall sequence, was like my least favorite scene in the whole movie. And I know going in, she has a connection to Donner, and that's where her and Jeff Johns kind of connects. They came up, and she was a huge fan of Donner and his Superman films, and it's one of her favorite movies of all time. And she stated this in numerous interviews, even before the first Wonder Woman movie came out. She talked about it, and I felt by this whole sequence, it literally looked like it was cut out of the original Superman movie and Superman 2 as well. And it just turned me off to the movie. I literally, as I was watching that sequence, it was like, oh wow, this is the whole vibe I got from the trailers, and that what I saw that I didn't like. I said, this is everything I didn't want to see in this movie. And it totally felt like this was a case of a director overindulging herself, and the studio not stepping in to reel her back in, um, which potentially could have made the movie much better, in my opinion, if they would have reeled her in some. Excuse me. And I know a lot had happened behind the scenes. Alan Heinberg was removed off the movie, and he sculpted the script for the first film that was received extremely well, and they totally gave her the reins, totally creatively in this movie. And what I heard in the build up to this movie, excuse me, was that it was a lot of stuff that went on behind the scenes. And when the first movie was filmed, it was a whole nother director that was scheduled and set to shoot the movie, and Patty Jenkins was kind of brought in as the last minute to come in and more like shoot the movie. She made some tweaks and changes, and she tried to fight the studio on certain stuff, but she wanted a different end sequence than what the studio wanted. She went on a real big press tour, kind of beating up the studio and talking bad about the studio in relations to that. And excuse me, guys, my voice cannot get straight this morning. That she didn't have as much control as she wanted. She fought certain stuff, and she has way more control in this movie, and she was very confident, borderline arrogant about certain stuff, how she was talking down the studio or walking them down about the first movie and how the second movie was going to be so different. And I feel like different aspects of people that were removed. They had brought in some of the stunt coordinators from the John Wick movies to help do the fight sequences in the first movies. They weren't asked back for the second movie. Alan Heinberg was removed. It was different things that potentially would have helped this film that were elements that were removed out. And she was very confident in a lot of the press tours, and I saw her do a ton of different interviews, and I adore Patty Jenkins. But it's just, I was like, I hope this movie's really good, because how she was talking, it was like she's going to catch a lot of blame if this doesn't land for everybody. Excuse me. And I feel like those elements, you have to rein certain times with creatives. They need to be reined in somewhat. They just do, because they can just sometimes go a little bit too far. And I feel like she was really making a movie for herself, not for the fandom at heart. And it's a balance. You have to. It's a tight rope that you have to walk. And I feel like she wasn't trying to walk it. She was just like, everyone else be damned. I'm making what I want to see on the screen. And I think that's what makes the movie divisive at the end of the day. But I thought one of the real strengths of the script was that they were doing in the beginning of the movie, and they kind of shied away from it, was playing up the aspect of the loneliness Diana had of going through all these decades since we last seen her, and her loneliness and her sadness. Excuse me. Especially when we saw like pictures, and each picture we saw as we went through her apartment, you saw one less of the team that she was with in the first movie. Each time they were a little bit older, and one more person was missing, and one more person was missing. To Candy was the very last person in the very last picture, that she was the last one of that group that survived, that she was with in her travels. The scene I really loved, and I thought Gal really sold it, was the dinner scene at the beginning of the movie. I wish they could have played that out more throughout the film, because I felt like they abandoned it, and it was really playing to Gal's strength and showing how well she's evolved as an actress in that character. And it read true to me from where things were at the end of the first movie, to be like, so many years had passed. She lost the man she loved, and Steve, and she had these amazing group of friends that she went through this first adventure when she was coming to the mainland from Themyscira, and then she continually lost these people that were near and dear to her. It just really would have been a good aspect and could have played more into why she, some of her actions later on in the film, if they carry that through, and they didn't do the best job of it. Um, I really felt that Kristen Wiig's Barbara Minerva was a really good character. I felt like it was really a shame, and I felt like she was semi wasted in the movie because she wasn't the main villain of the film. By far, she was not. Excuse me. I felt like her story arc could have been extended through two films, and with this first film ending with her transformation into Cheetah, and let her arc felt really rushed. That, I liked the progression the character was making, and then it was like when they got to the final act, she just quickly got transformed into Cheetah. Like, she went off screen, and then when she came back, she was just full on Cheetah mode. Um, and I felt like that was a wasted opportunity because I felt like Kristen Wiig she turned in a really good performance, though I felt like it was overshadowed by Pedro Pascal. I think he did an excellent job as Maxwell Lord, um, which will kind of get lost probably. Both of these performances will probably get lost, and due to the overall reception of the movie and how the movie plays out, that their performances were really strong as villain characters. But I felt like her transformation into Cheetah in her battle with Diana could have been so much more if it was built up over two films, and you start seeing more of that descent into madness and that anger if they had really stretched that out, because it really wasn't any room, because this story was really about Diana and Maxwell and him wanting to be so successful and wanting to be rich and successful to prove to everyone that ever doubted him that he could amount to something, and to show that he could be this important person for his son. But at the same time, Diana being lonely and missing Steve and wanting him back so desperately. So they really were two sides of the same coin. And Barbara is really excuse me, is pretty much a throwaway character in the scheme of the film, in the greater scheme. But and I didn't know how I felt when they casted Kristen Wiig as Barbara, how that was gonna work, and she pulled it off so well. But like I said, Pedro really just nailed that Maxwell Lord character so well. And I'll talk about the performances a little bit later. I just want to touch on the fact of another thing that I thought, they made such a big deal out of the movie being set in 1984. And the first film did a really great job, even though it had fantasy elements. It was grounded in this certain reality around true historical events around the First World War. So many historical events happened in and around during the time frame of 1984 in the world, and they made a fake-ish, kind of based on true events, historical events that were going on in this film. What was the point? It didn't make any sense, because it was so many real life things they could have really played upon, like they did in the first movie. It just didn't make sense. It just was really dumb on why you focus specifically, literally. Excuse me, goodness. I apologize, y'all. Why it had to be so specifically that they literally put the title of the movie is Wonder Woman 1984. It was such a historical time period, and you really didn't use any real life events whatsoever, but you had all this product placement there and all this other stuff that played into that time period in that year, but you didn't have any true events to play into it. It just, again, I felt like more overindulgence, because this movie could have been set current day and had the same plot points be hit, and it didn't have to be set in 1984. That was probably one of the stupidest things that I felt played out throughout the movie. that it was no true historical reference, because that was one of the things that made the first movie for me so strong, that it was based in such a real life event, historical event that happened in time, and to have another time period set so vividly throughout the marketing and everything of the movie. Aesthetically, that whole backdrop is set up there, and to not utilize it makes no sense to me. Um, and I didn't get the need for basically a partial rehash of the first film with the whole fish out of water aspect. Um, but just flipping it by it being Steve being the fish out of water, and Diana now being the seasoned experienced person showing Steve around this new time period. That's the first movie. It just showed a total lack of original ideas that you lean so heavily, and that was such a big part of the story. Um, for me, I feel like Gail has cemented herself as Wonder Woman for me at this point, just kind of like Chris Evans has done for Captain America in my head. It's just like, or um, Robert Downey as Tony Stark. Is just like, for the time being, she's just synonymous in my head. I think when I think Gal Gadot, I'm gonna think Wonder Woman. Uh, but I felt like part of her performance was unbalanced, especially when it came to her friendship with Barbara. Um, at times, it read very disingenuous, and it came off as she being a very shallow person when it came to her interactions with her. That it was really like she had no interest in Barbara until she got the artifacts in from the robbery, and then she only then kind of befriended her to get close enough to her to then see what things that she had got into the museum from the heist from the mall. So it just read as she was a really shallow person, which Gail doesn't read as that person, but it came off that way, and I don't know if that was their intention. But I think otherwise, she had a very strong performance throughout. Um, and I think she, as the character as Diana in Wonder Woman, I think she was just as strong, if not stronger, in this movie than as she was in the first movie. And you saw her definitely evolve as the character, as the time in the years past that she had evolved, and definitely had been through some things between the films. I felt like also the action scenes weren't the same caliber as they were in the first film by far, and I think that was the exclusion of the stunt coordinators from the John Wick movie. They didn't have the same punch, and I didn't know how many times they were going to have her do like the whole shin slide. Like, she just kept shin sliding. It was like how people used to play Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter back in the day, and they only knew one move, so they would just spam that move the whole match. That's what it felt like. They kept spamming the shin slide throughout the movie, like shin slide, shin slide, shin slide. I was like, really? That was like what was it, Mortal Kombat, and you could use like Sub-Zero or Scorpion. You could get real close to him. You just keep leg sweeping him. You just kept seeing the person fall down, fall down, fall down. That's what it felt like throughout the whole movie. So again, not the best decision because Patty went out of the way letting everybody know that she was running the show for this movie. Bad decision by Patty, though, like I said, much love, but just bad decisions. And again, if the studio would have came in and was like, no, that worked for the first movie, they just really let her have too much control. And I hope going forward with what she does, and I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth in this a little bit later, but as far as if she's the person that does Wonder Woman 3, which I think could potentially be in question, she might be like, might be that she's more an executive producer and let someone else direct it, because she has quite a few things lined up, and I don't know how they're going to proceed and how quickly they're going to want to proceed with the next movie in the trilogy. I guess it remains to be seen at this point. And like I said, it was talk at one point that she was going to do an Amazon movie in between. I think her and Gal has teamed up with another studio to do a Cleopatra movie. Then she came out and announced after this movie came out that she's working with Lucasfilm, and she has a Rogue Squadron movie coming out as well. So Patty Jenkins' dance card is getting full. And so it's going to be interesting to see if she will have time to helm another Wonder Woman movie, or if she's even going to still do this Amazon's movie that she so passionately talked about. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I wouldn't be excited for her to direct said movies, because I got stoked when I saw the little teaser trailer that Lucasfilm put out with her announcing that she was doing a Rogue Squadron movie. I'm like, I'm so into that, considering that she attached in that teaser such a personal story, prompting why she wanted to do the movie. But she definitely needs some safeguards in there, some people to check her, because I think she kind of got a big head, and we've seen it happen. M. Night Shyamalan, we've seen it happen with different directors over time, where they get cocky because they have success, and they kind of lose their way. So I hope they do rein that in some, because I think she's a super talented filmmaker. You just can't give her too much control. That's the biggest thing I think I learned from this. Another thing that was a big aspect of the movie that bothered me is the Wonder Woman outfit looked like it was made totally out of padding and not actual armor like it was in the first film, which bothered me and took me out the film tremendously. I was trying to not, but especially because they kept spamming the shin slide, you kept seeing, it's like, yo, that's padding. That looks like, I don't know what material, like wrestling padding, like for kickboxers and stuff when they're training, that they have on, and I'm a big fan of like professional wrestling. So like I've seen wrestlers like wear those shin type, and that's what it looked like. It looked so cheap. And I was like, yo, her armor looked so good, and her outfit looked so good in the first movie. It popped because everything was, super saturated colors and all that, especially because of the motif of it being 1984. But I just felt like I don't want that in 2020 or 2021 when this was released, probably shot in 2020, 2019, because they kept delaying the movie. That's a whole nother story. So I don't want to see that in my current day movies, those old style of movies. That's why I do retro reviews, to go back and revisit those old classic movies, and for that aesthetic and that style, especially now with 4K. And I watched this movie on 4K. It was just like, it just over accentuated how fake it looked. And it's kind of like the first Avengers movie. To this day, it still bothers me. I thought Captain America's costume was the ugliest I ever seen it in that movie, and it bothers me to no end. And every time I watch that movie, I still talk about it to this day. And I've watched that movie a lot. Not a lot, but a lot. And it still bothers me to this day how god awful that costume looked. And if it's not aesthetically pleasing, it can break the interaction, or that suspension of disbelief. That's the term I'm looking for in the movie. And the more I kept seeing it, the more it kept bothering me, and more it kept reminding me of the movie, instead of it's a movie and not being into the storyline that was being portrayed in the movie. And finally, I'm shocked that they repeated the mistake they did in the first movie by making the third act so heavily reliant on CGI. But in this, it just was poorly done CGI. I'll take the CGI done in the first movie for the end sequence that I did in this one, and it just didn't look well for Cheetah. And I'm like, that's something they have to nail. Like, that's her Green Goblin, that's her like Lex Luthor, is like Ares and Cheetah, and you've muffed them both at this point. But I feel like they totally just kicked the dog on this. It could have been done so much better. And they delayed the movie so much. It's like, that's what you came up with. I felt like certain CGI spots in the movie just weren't really good, and like how Diana was like the running thing, it was like weird. There was certain things that just could have been tightened up around the edges. And I really think, like, all in all, like, and I know, I when I write these reviews, like when I go back, because I'm not in the theater, I can really go back and sit down, and I'm taking notes, and everything I'm talking about are all just points that came to me as I watched the movie. And literally, like I said, I watched it twice. And the second time, I sat there with my notes, taking notes, and clarifying my notes. So I know it sounds more negative than positive, but all in all, I think it had a potential to be a great movie. It's just certain small aspects that where if they were reined in during production and filming, that could have made the movie be from meh or okay to really, it could have been a great movie. But we kind of got a mediocre movie in the life, in return, because certain things were just left unchecked. It could have been just reined in just ever so slightly, and it could have, you know, taken it, really honed it into, it could have been just as good or even better, if like they played up certain emotional things and really played upon the wear and tear of being in the world alone all this time. Really, that should have been the central story of the movie and played up more in the actual script, and that should have been focused on a little bit more instead of her romping around with Steve, kind of doing the whole bit, the fish out of water bit we had already seen in the first movie. And but we got what we got in the final product. And for me, just breaking down ratings wise, I think the acting was an 8 out of 10. I think all the top performances, Pedro Pascal knocked it out the park. I think Gail was uneven at parts, but still rock solid. Kristen Wiig, like I said, I didn't know how that was going to work. I really enjoyed it, and I hope if they do a third movie and she's still around, because it's kind of left up in the air. When the movie ends, I think Barbara's still around, and the whole real trick about everything was, she made her initial wish on the Wish Stone after Maxwell wished to become the Wish Stone. When she got into cheetah form, she that was the wish she made with Maxwell. So when he rescinded his wish at the end, she should have gotten turned back to human, which I think we did see a shot of her human again. But her initial wish that she made with the Wish Stone was still there, so she still should have, because she wanted to be like Diana, so she should have been immortal like Diana, and she still should have the strength. And I liked her in that form, especially when they had that whole White House fight sequence. So she still could be powered, and she could be around if they skip to present day. Barbara Minerva can still be around, just like Diana was. So it's still wiggle room left to bring her back, and I hope they do. And I hope if and when they do, that she's the focal point and the only villain in the movie, because I really felt like she was the most underrated, maybe underappreciated part of the whole movie. And I wish they, like I said, they would have did a slow burn on her story instead of condensing it down and forcing it through, because we got good little bits and parts of scenes, but she should have been a focal point because she turned in a really great performance. So again, the acting I gave an 8 out of 10. Casting I gave a 10 out of 10. The direction I would say a 6 out of 10, because Patty just needs to be reined in on this. Like I said, she just had way too much control, and she made a love letter to the Donner Superman films, and that's not what Wonder Woman was. She established something differently when she shot the first movie. So you can do a homage to certain things or pay homage to certain things, but it was too much. It was just too much. And I grew up in the 80s, and I love that time period. Time period of my childhood, but it was vomited all over the movie, and I was slapped across the face repeatedly with it, and I didn't need that. I lived it. Didn't need to see it. And parts of the 80s weren't that glamorous, so it was definitely that's a whole nother topic and story there. But I just think it was a bunch of overindulgence in it. So that I had to give it a 6 out of 10 for the direction of the movie. Special effects and costumes, yeah, that's a 5 out of 10, Chief. Like that outfit just killed me throughout. I thought, as far as the period time, the wardrobe, all that was cool, but her costume just did not work. It popped on screen, but it just looked totally fake. And yeah, I didn't like it. Just point blank, I didn't like it. Story overall, because I felt like most of the movie was a rehash of the first movie, just them swapping spots. I gave that a 6 out of 10. So overall, the movie, based on those numbers, comes out to be a 7 out of 10. It wasn't good as the first movie. I would pick the first movie and rewatch the first movie definitely more than this film. But what can we say? You get what you get, and it's still potential there. I definitely would be stoked to see another movie. Again, I'm curious to see if they'll let her helm the movie, or if they will definitely rein it in. I hope they bring Alan Heinberg back because he's a great writer, and I think he could help. He could have tightened up those scripts in those areas and focused on the right things, because he seemed like he had a great pulse for the character, for the script that he turned in for the first film. So, you know, hopefully they bring him back, and please bring back those John Wick stunt coordinators, because the action set pieces that they had were just, we know Gail could pull it off because she did it in the first movie, and she looked even more fit in this one than she did in the first one. So it just, yeah, bring the people back that you booted off the movie, please. Like, get involved and do the right thing. And I feel like we can kill this third movie if done just right. Um, and hopefully, like I said, I don't know if now, because they're announcing a bunch of shows for HBO Max. Maybe it won't be an Amazon's movie per se, but it can be maybe an HBO Max like mini series or something like that, where they could do something in that world. Since she talked so passionately about wanting to do something and it being a film, um, but again, we haven't heard anything, because with such divisiveness coming out of the film, we haven't really heard anything about what's in store for the future. And I think I'm trying to think when Patty's Star Wars movie, because they announced the release date. I want to say it's like, is it 20? Was it 2020? I don't think it was 2022. It was like 2023 or 2024. It's not that far away. And then this whole Cleopatra movie that she's doing with Gal Gadot, like, so I don't know how all that's going to play out in the cards, but yeah, I guess when we know something, I'll report it and we'll talk about it here. But that's all I have for you guys for this episode. This is a little bit longer episode because it was so much to unpack in this movie. I swear to you, it was. But that's all I have for you for this episode. I appreciate all your guys' support as always. Definitely, if you want to find out anything related to the show, you can go to comicbooksavant.com. Links to my Facebook page is there, as well as the Facebook group. You can click on the link. It'll take you over to the Facebook page. Or if you just search for on facebook.com/Comic Book Savant, all one word, you'll get to the Comic Book Savant page, and it's a link right there to the group. You answer a few questions, you get right into the group. We talk comics constantly, so definitely, if you have a moment, check that out. If you'd like to support the show in any kind of way, I have a Patreon page. You can find it at patreon.com/Comic Book Savant as well. And that's all I have for you guys for this episode. As always, you guys stay safe, and until next time, take care. Talk to you soon. Bye.